My name is Diana Gonzalez, and my proposition is that video games do not cause violence and are a source of stress relieving / rehabilitation. In the year 1997, a boy named Evan Ramsey entered his high school in Bethel, Nebraska. It was just like any other day, except that this day he planned to commit murder. Evan shot and killed a fellow student named Josh and the principal, and wounded 2 other fellow students. My 2 major points are that killing an NPC is not the same as killing a person in real life, and that video games are a source of rehabilitation. So killing an NPC is not the same as killing a real person in life. An NPC is a non-player character, which often has a human form or sometimes it's a monster. Experts Peter Bordero and Thilo Hartmann from the Department of Communication Science at the Center for Advanced Media Research in Amsterdam conducted a study on whether or not most people feel guilt in killing these non-human life forms. The study demonstrated that many males were attracted to playing violent video games, and that most of the players felt no guilt for killing these NPCs. So technically, these people felt that these NPCs did not qualify as people. A decade after the interview in 2007, Evan blamed the shooting onto a popular game in the 1990s called Doom. It was a great video game, but you had to shoot like 8 times just to kill the person. He explained that I did not understand if I pull out a gun and shoot you, there's a good chance you're not getting back up. So he thought if you shoot a real person, it would take 8 times to kill him. That might be true, but he kind of went for the head and it was a one-shot kill. And in the end, the U.S. Circuit Court dismissed the case in 2001 by agreeing that it was kind of crazy to think that shooting a person 8 or 9 times could be real in real life, like in the video game. Evan Ramsey had a long history of violence in his past, and it's common knowledge that people that have a violent past are likely to be violent in the future. My second point is that violent video games or regular video games are a source of stress reliever or rehabilitation. An experiment in clinical rehabilitation required patients that suffer Huntington's disease to play DDR to improve their movements, coordination, and exercise habits as a potential exercise in the Huntington's disease. A Huntington's disease is basically a genetic disorder that causes nerve cells in some parts of the brain to degenerate, so you can't really move that well. DDR is the game called Dance Dance Revolution that is played with the legs, so they would practice it and they would improve. Another video game that was used as rehabilitation is the popular video game that's called Just Dance, and it's helping to fight obesity around the world, and it's pretty popular these days. And that's pretty much my argument, that video games do not cause violence and are a source of rehabilitation.
All right, Diana, you start off with basically 2 propositions, and the first one is phrased with a negative term in it, so that's a little bit awkward. And I thought maybe what I was getting here was a preview, and that ultimately sounds like what it comes down to, is that you are actually previewing the argument. So there's not a single proposition that covers both of those points, but rather you've basically got 2 separate arguments here. On the first argument, it seems like there's a presupposition that there is a relationship because of this example, and as soon as we can dismiss this example, there isn't any reason to believe that people are affected by this. I think that that's a little problematic. You did have one other piece of evidence on this that suggested that people, don't really worry about the NPC characters that they kill online, in their games. So I'm not exactly sure why that's important in demonstrating that there is no relationship between the video game violence and violence in the culture. I guess your argument here is that people do recognize that there is a difference between their online and their real life, and that they don't let that bleed over. That, I think, is maybe the start of that argument. I think you could use some more evidence on that particular point. Then it makes it sound like the only other evidence that supports such a link is this one case that you have, Evan Ramsey, and you spend a good amount of time kind of debunking that case, which I think is a good strategy, but I'm not sure that that's the only evidence that links violence in video games to violence in the world. And I think especially when you've got a case that was, he's coming back to that 8 years after he originally was convicted, making the appeal saying that there was a relationship. I think most people, even the advocates of the notion that there is a relationship, would see that as being potentially problematic. The second point that you're talking about, that it's potentially beneficial for rehabilitation, I'm not sure there's any dispute on that issue. Any type of mental activity or physical activity is probably good for people with a variety of ailments, whether it's Huntington's or whether they've got some other kind, if they've had a stroke or something, some kind of physical activity that might be repetitive or that would allow them to match times, or adjust the times based on what their ability to do sounds perfectly fine. And DDR and the other game that you mentioned both sound like they would be fine. I don't know that anybody challenges that. So I'm not sure where there's controversy on that particular point. I thought you were trying to do a pretty good job presenting while you were speaking, but it is over very quickly, and so I thought it was underdeveloped when it came to the content. All right, thank you.